Hi, I'm David Broadbent, and welcome to another episode of the Chaddy Enders, where each week I sit down with somebody that has a connection to Oldham Athletic Football Club and talk about their time at Boundary Park. A big thank you, as ever, to our sponsors, to AC Tyres, Wayne and the team there, to James and NFL Weekends, and to Rick at Eden Creative and Design. It is fantastic to have your guys' support. Also, thank you to Luke, who puts all this together, because I'm rubbish, quite frankly, at that sort of stuff. We've got a bit of a different one this week, because it's part two of Alan Hardy. Alan spent 31 years at the club as commercial manager, and then moving on to chief exec. And part two covers his time as chief exec at the club, which began in 1997 up until he retired in 2012. If you want to get in touch with us at any point, we are on Facebook and Twitter at the Chaddy Enders. Give us a search. If there's any questions you want to ask or any future guests you'd like to see, then please do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. But now we go to part two, and welcome back, Alan Hardy. Alan, thank you very much for joining us again. Part two, the chief executive years. So to start with, we're going to take you back to 1997. Where you became chief exec of the club. First of all, how did that come about? How did you progress from commercial manager to chief exec?
Well, it was at the time there was a bit of a rearrangement at board level, and Ian Stott stood down as chairman, and he was effectively chief executive at the time as well. David Briley took over as chairman, and then the board asked me if I would consider taking on the chief executive's role, and that of the club secretary as well. That was 97, and obviously I was delighted to accept that position. And who was manager at the time was Neil Warnock.
So a character, strong character.
A bit different to Joe, but no less amusing. Neil had his little quirks. I mean, on an away trip, if you're on an away trip down London, say, and you're there on the Friday night or what have you, and you get the players together and have a bit of a chat, and he'd get some glasses lined up, and he'd fill them all with sherry, and then crack a raw egg in each of them. And the player, he would nominate the first player to come up and drink the sherry with a raw egg. And then the next player, he would nominate the next player, and so on. The players was nominated then. So they'd gone through probably around about half a dozen players at this stage. And Doug Hodgson, do you know Doug Hodgson?
I do, yeah.
Big bruising Australian defender. Good lad, Dougie. He come up, no problem at all. So Neil Warnock says, right, Dougie, who are you nominating next? He looks around the room. He says, Alan. Oh, don't really fancy this, sherry and a raw egg. No. I thought, but I can't duck out. So I start walking up to the table. Luckily, Neil said, no, that's not fair. That's not fair. Players only.
Oh, so got away.
God for that. But I'll tell you one player, Andy Ritchie at that time, because he was like Neil's assistant at the time, I suppose. He always stayed away at events like that. Andy Ritchie would never drink sherry with a raw egg, but the others had to partake in it.
I think
that was nearly a disaster for me, having to drink a sherry with a raw egg. But thankfully, the manager, Neil Warnock, stopped that. And by the way, he was nice. I mean, him and his wife Sharon, while they were here, they rented a house up at Lidgate, and they're very, very sociable. He invited myself and my wife round to dinner one evening, along with the finance director and his wife from Lookers, because I had Lookers in supplying cars and what have you. And of course, Neil wanted to make sure he always got a nice car. So he thought, oh, we'll get the finance director from Lookers up as well, like, you know. So we had a nice evening up at Neil's with the dinner. But he brought in two musicians, a pianist, and a flautist who play the music. And this is up at Leadgate. It's wonderful, wonderful evening. So some good times with Neil.
So, in terms of taking on the new role, what challenges did that present? Because you've gone from being, all right, a senior member of staff as commercial manager that have been at the club a long time to the boss, effectively. Did that present?
Yeah, you're right. And instead of just looking after the commercial staff, it was a case of overseeing everything. And we had to bring in, a new commercial guy at the time to cover for me. You remember who that was, don't you?
Trying to think what order it came in. Was Bob before Sean?
No, it was Sean, wasn't it?
Was it Sean? Right, okay.
And Bob came in. I think Bob came in while Sean was there towards the end. But we interviewed Sean. I interviewed Sean, and then the directors interviewed him, and he was a standout candidate, to be honest. And he came in must have been that 97, later that year, and he carried on the good work of the commercial department, certainly. Well, but then you've got the you're in direct control of the players' contracts. You might end up negotiating with players' agents, players themselves, but it included contracts with coach travel, hotel accommodation, everything. So it was a completely different role, but very enjoyable. And I enjoyed getting my teeth into that. It was a bit of negotiating, which I enjoyed doing.
Do you remember the first player that you signed?
There's so many. Can I remember? No way. Can I remember? No. There's some interesting ones, by the way, and some interesting ones that we didn't actually get. Let me just talk. There was two players. The players had an end of season trip. I think it must have been 1998 to St. Kitts in the Caribbean. So we went over. I think myself and director Derek Taylor went over on that trip. And we played 3 games. We won the tournament, actually. It was against Jamaica and the St. Kitts team, I think it was. We won the tournament, so we got presented with this trophy. It's only a 3-game tournament. But we saw a lad called Keith Gums playing for St. Kitts. Do you remember the name?
Yep.
Yeah. And we invited him over, and there's another 2 players we invited over for trials. And we were keen to sign Keith. The problem was that in those days, a player had to be full international, which he was with St. Kitts, but his country had to be in the top 75 of FIFA World Rankings, and they weren't, unfortunately, because of all the point system. So we tried everything to try and get. Did he have a mother who had a European passport or anything like that? But there was nothing. An auntie or a grandma. There was no connections to Europe, unfortunately. And he was one that got away. And for a number of years, I've probably not communicated with him now for a few years, but he was playing out in Asia somewhere. And I used to get regular emails from him and kept in touch with him. He was a lovely lad, and I would like to have seen him play in league football. And another one more recently than him was Diego Cavero. Do you remember him?
Oh, the lad from Oviedo?
Oviedo, that's right, yeah. He played in a pre-season friendly. I think it was at Fleetwood. And he looked the part, to be honest. But the manager at the time, I think it was Shez. I think it might have been Shez, who didn't fancy him. But it would have been good to get it. He had a wonderful goal celebration that the fans would have loved. They really would, honestly. I think that there's one fan certainly kept in touch with him and throughout his career, and I think he's a doctor now and such. But it would have been nice to see him play in league football. Another player, well, we did have, and of course it was. He unfortunately died at a very early age, Ernie Cooksey, and what a wonderful lad Ernie was. I went down to his funeral with Ian Dowie at the time. Such tragic to die at such a young age. But a lovely lad, Ernie, lovely lad. Some good players and talk about characters as well. You probably don't remember this, but soon after becoming chief executive, of course, I go down to the Chapel Road training ground to meet the staff and have a chat with them. And I walk in. It's a double door entry into the changing room, so I walk in. It's a big foyer, but from the previous day, they'd been using the five-a-side goals.
I know what this is.
You know, they were stacked up in there, and the net, I didn't really see the goal net sticking out a bit. And I tripped over the goal net. And I put my arms out to break my fall and broke both my elbows. Oh, and it knocked me really sick. The ground staff saying, "Oh, are you all right? Oh, yeah, I'm fine. I'll be all right. Don't worry, mate, I'm okay." I thought, I went sick. I had to go out. And I got back to the car. And I could only just open the car door, get my mobile phone out to phone Betty at the club. It's a bit, if I had a fall, I've really hurt me and I can't drive. There's no way I can turn the steering wheel. I said, "You'll have to get Bob Gorrell to come down and pick me up." So Bob came down. I said, "This is bad, this, Bob." I said, I need to go to the hospital. I said, "But I'm not going to Oldham Royal." I said, "Because it'll be a forever in A&E. So you'll have to take me straight to Highfield, Rochdale." So he phoned Betty. He said, "Tell Highfield we're coming." Highfield said, "We don't normally take cases in like this." Betty explained what the situation was and who I was, and they took me in. And they x-rayed, and I broke both elbows, and they put a back slab on plaster case on both of them, and I had to sit like that for 3 days with my arms like that. You can see that on camera.
Yep.
Couldn't do anything for myself. So you can imagine what the nurses had to do for me. Yeah. After 3 days, they took these. So we've got to start doing some physio now. I said, "What physio? Otherwise, they'll set like that." So I had to start moving after 3 days, but I still couldn't pick things up. Just had to keep moving and what have you. That's right. We'll have a shower. I said, "I can't shower myself." So the nurse had to shower me in the shower there. And then when I got home, I still couldn't do anything for myself. So you imagine what my wife Viv had to do for me. What have you. It was horrendous time. That went on for probably around about 3-4 weeks before I got full use back into my arms again. It was horrendous. But the players heard about this. And of course, a few weeks later, when I'm back at work, I go down to the training ground, very, very careful, going to the entrance. And it's like a quarry tile floor. It's like a crime scene. There's a chalk drawing of a body on the floor. And at the side, a pair of spectacles. And I found out it was Sean Garnett who did that.
Well, Sean was another massive character. One of the stories that I always hear about Sean was on team photo day when he decided to run across the pitch naked.
Yeah. He's a character. And when we went to play Tranmere when he went back to Tranmere, you're doing the academy there and what have you, I bump into him a few times and have a chat with him. He's a good lad, Sean. Good lad. But those, there's some wonderful characters at the club in those days.
So
what were you asking me?
Well, I've got loads of questions. Don't worry about that. So at what point? So you're now chief exec. When Neil Warnock leaves and Andy Ritchie takes over, and from that point, are you involved in the appointing and the interviewing of managers at that stage? Yeah,
I get involved. I mean, obviously there was like 2 or 3 of the directors and myself who would interview the managers. But I mean, I think it was a foregone conclusion with Andy at that stage that he would move up to take over as manager. And that was in 98, wouldn't it be? 98, yeah.
And it wasn't long after, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things, that The club got new owners when Chris Moore came in.
Well, I mean, I mentioned about the board of directors, the change in '97 with David Brierley becoming chairman, but they got the directors then at the time, like your Derek Taylors, your Peter Chadwicks, and your John Slevins, and your Rod Adams, and Norman Holden, great people, lovely people. They managed to take back all the shares, take controlling interest back from John Willie Lees. So they bought the shares, knowing that they'd all be together then, basically, to sell on if somebody wanted to invest in the club. And David had met with Chris Moore. He seemed very, very keen. And basically, they'd agreed to sell the shares to him. And then a few days later, he brings Chris Moore in to introduce me to him. And he seemed perfectly fine at that stage. And he said, I'll show you how to get promoted. And he threw money at it. And he threw, over the 3 years he was there, he threw about £4 million at it. And of course, we all know how it ended at the playoffs with QPR not getting promoted. And then turn around and saying that, I'm not investing any more money. The club's available. But the unfortunate thing was that before we got to those playoffs, the board at that time was Chris Moore, myself, his drinking buddy, and his sister. And he got his sister to put a letter together, signed by the two directors, his drinking buddy and his sister, to suspend me, put me on garden leave, basically, under investigation. I don't know what I was under investigation for, and there was never any investigation carried out. And he just wanted me out of the way. He said I couldn't obviously return to the club until the investigation was completed. And it meant me sitting at home, not being able to get to the playoff games. So, I wasn't able to watch those games at all. But it soon transpired, the reason why he wanted me out of the way, because he wasn't going to put any money in. He wanted to sell all the decent players that they had. Fitzall, Chris Armstrong, Clint Hill. He wanted to get money in for them before the club went into administration or it was taken over. But it ended up costing him about £4 million at the end of the day. He thought he could show you how to get a club promoted to the Premier League. It didn't work out for him. So that was perhaps for the darkest time. The darkest time. And as we know, because I wasn't at the club, Neil and Sean took control for £1. And Barry Chato, who had known from his previous involvement at Bolton Wanderers and at Carlisle, he was chairman at Bolton, chairman at Carlisle. So I bumped into him a few times and got to know him quite well. He'd heard about the situation and rang the club, supposedly to speak to me, thinking I was still there. And he spoke to Neil and Sean. He said, look, if you need any help, I'm here to help. Neil and Sean decided he was ideal to have along, asked him to come in and operate as chairman. But he said, but where's Alan? So he said, Chris Moore put him on garden leave pending investigation. He said, well, I think we need him back here. So Barry phoned me up. He says, I'll see you at 9 o'clock in the morning. So that was in the back end of the July, I think, middle of July 2003. So I'd had from April, May, June, I'd had probably about 3 months sitting at home, not doing anything, couldn't do anything while all this was going on, unfortunately. But managed to get back to the club then in the July. And it was only then when we'd looked at all the figures, there was no real option but to put the club into administration and see what transpired from there. And we had good administrators at the time. They were excellent, to be honest. But you couldn't buy anything without them having the say, so signing it off. So we had to work very strictly under their control. But we have the day-to-day running of the business. But when it came to spending money, they had the final say. And in the September, there was interest from the three amigos, two Simons and Danny, who came over, and I remember them coming to the club and had to show them around the land, how the club was able to acquire the land again, which was sold to the council previously. And they agreed with the administrators then to fund the club going through administration and eventually take over when all the CVA was agreed. And that happened in the January of 2004, and hence Oldham Athletic 2004 Limited.
And with Chris Moore, before it all went wrong, we actually assembled under Ian Dowie a very good side that perhaps in a lot of other years would have gone up out of a very strong division that time. I think that year QPR, Cardiff and Wigan went up. So a very strong team that we'd assembled.
Well, of course, what would happen, I think we played Tranmere a night match at home. Oh, I think we'd won. But he wasn't happy. Chris Moore wasn't happy. And he says to me in the boardroom, he says, I want to change your manager. I said, what? I said, we're about 5th or 6th from top, something like that. He said, I want to change your manager. I said, well, it's too early, give Andy a chance and let's see. We go, no. He says, come on, we'll go next door and have a chat with him. Manager's office was next door. Went in, told him that it was no longer required. And I thought it was a crazy decision, to be honest. So obviously we advertised for a manager, and we had 2 lots of interviews. Myself and Chris Moore, we interviewed some at the Radisson Hotel at Manchester Airport. This is what he wanted. He rented the boardroom at the Radisson Hotel, Manchester Airport. Beautiful room. Don't know how much it cost him. He paid for it, but we rented that room. We had probably 6 interviewed there. One of them was Mick Wadsworth, and we'd planned up for meetings the following day down at his farm in Oxfordshire. So after the meetings at the Radisson, we're driving down to Oxford, and he says, I want Mick Wadsworth. I said, well, that's fine. He came across very well, Mick. I said, but we've got others tomorrow, yeah. No, I don't want Mick to go anywhere else. Ring him now and tell him he's got the job. I said, you sure? I said, we've got, a few more tomorrow. But give me a ring now, give him a ring. Rung him from the car driving down to Oxford, told him he'd got the job. The following day, one of the people we interviewed was Ian Dowie. After the interviews, he said, I want Ian Dowie. I said, but we've already told Mick Wadsworth. Well, Ian can come in as his assistant. And that's how we ended up with Mick Wadsworth and Ian Dowie. He had to convince Mick Wadsworth to take Ian on as his assistant. And then Ian ended up becoming permanent manager. Basically, Chris Moore fell out with Mick, as he does. And Ian took over. But Ian then brought fitness coaching called John Harbin, who was at the rugby at the time. I think he was the rugby manager, and he'd come down to have a chat with Ian, told him what he was doing up at the rugby, and Ian said, I could do with you here as fitness coach. So he brought him in as fitness coach. And to be honest, he was brutal with the players, John Harbin. They were swimming at 7:30 in the morning before they came into training, what have you. And they took them boxing, they did everything with them. But he had them fit. And he put a brilliant team together, which you say, got us to the playoffs in 2003, wasn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So, but then unfortunately, after that, it was the breakup of the team. Ian stayed along for a while when the three amigos came in. But yeah, it was good football under Ian. He's a good coach. He was a good coach.
And then, what was your relationship to start with? You've got new owners, so I guess from a chief exec's point of view, you need a close working relationship with your owners.
Yeah, well, it was a new board, of course. I mean, they asked me to go on the board as well, which I was happy to do. And things started off quite well. There was big plans what they wanted to do. They wanted to demolish the locker stand and build a new stand. It took them a few years to get around to demolishing it. And the unfortunate thing was they wanted to develop the land as well, and that was it got to 2000 and was it 2007, I think it was, where we'd put the planning application in for some residential on the car park and new stand and one thing and another, new stadium basically. And it got, so that was in the June of 2007, because we'd had an offer from a building company who wanted to, housing developer, to buy some of the land at a lot of money, and I mean a lot of money. It was millions and millions of pounds. But the planning application got turned down in the June with Oldham Council. And you probably recall that we managed to get the fans to march from Civic Centre down to the game one day to protest about the council. And eventually they agreed to put it back. They put the planning application up before the planning meeting in the December, which it would be. It would take till December to get it back into the in circulation. But in the September of that year, people started queuing up outside Northern Rock Building Society to draw the money out, because they see the big crash coming and what have you. And it started then, and that was the start of it in the September. And because of that, the developer who wanted to buy the land for residential withdrew their offer. So the planning application that went through in December was pointless then, because we hadn't got the company offering the money that would have been in there to take the club forward, to build a new stand, to redevelop the old ground, which the money that they were offering would have done. So that was a disaster, because if it had been, planning had been passed in the June, we'd have had the money from the developer and it had all been sorted.
And the pitch at the time, under the new owners, we had some good seasons and some bad seasons. We were a bit unpredictable in League One for a few years. I mean, we had a couple of last day escapes, but then a couple of playoff pushes.
Yeah, it was up and down. It was we got playoffs against Blackpool, wasn't it? What was Richie Wellens in the Blackpool side?
Yeah, he would have been that time, wouldn't he?
Yeah. And I thought we might have got through that game, but it wasn't to be. That was close, and then after that, it was tough going. I think after that, wasn't it, for them? And then later on, we had the next financial crash, which meant that Simon Blitz's businesses over in the States were doing as well. Him and Danny then stepped down from the board and said that they couldn't invest any more money in the club, and left Simon Corney with the club. And Simon was happy to continue with the club and continue as chairman. but it wasn't easy because it was tough. You needed a lot of money to keep putting in to try and make progress. So it was always going to be tough for Simon on his own.
Going back a few years before sort of Simon Corney took the club on his own, not long after the new owners came in, another big cup day at Boundary Park, beating Manchester City in the FA Cup in 2005 under Brian Talbot.
Yeah, I think that was the day. Brian was staying at a hotel in Manchester, and his wife had come up because it was a big game. His wife wanted to come to the game, so his wife had stayed at the hotel the previous night as well. And they were driving up from Manchester up Oldham Road, and there was a demonstration on, and it was, I think it might have been Kurds or something, Kurdish people. They were all across the road, Oldham Road, big demonstration. All the police was there, and he was held up in this traffic. And I think one of the people demonstrating must have fallen onto the car, and was claiming that Brian had actually run into him. And when he actually got to the ground late, he was a bit shaken up, Brian. And this was before a big cup game. I'm pretty sure it was this game. And his wife was shaken up as well, and he was telling me all about what had gone on. Anyway, in the end, nothing came of that. The claim that he'd been hit by a car, but there's a little bit of damage to the car with the demonstrators. And I think that was the car that we passed on to him from Ian Dowie, Mercedes. Did you pick a car up for us?
So Brian Talbot obviously didn't end well for him. He didn't really settle in the north, and I remember being at Bristol City on a Tuesday night, and after about an hour we were 4-0 down. We'd been beaten at home on the Saturday by a Stockport team that hadn't won a game in about 6 months. And Brian Talbot did an interview afterwards where he said that it wasn't his fault because it wasn't his team, although he'd signed 9 of the 16. And at 4-0 down on the Tuesday, the fans had turned. And I was behind the goal at Bristol City, and you rang me from the boardroom. You were with Simon Corney, and you rang me to find out what the fans were singing. Because there were only a couple of hundred, with it being a Tuesday night game, and you couldn't make it out from the boardroom. And the fans were actually chanting, "Don't worry, because it's not your fault," and about him being sacked and relieved of his position. And I think about less than a week later, myself and your son Nick drove to a services on the M25 in one club car to pick up Brian's car because he'd been relieved of his duties, I think, at about 70 minutes into that Bristol City game.
Yeah. Was it still the Mercedes they had then?
Yeah, yes, it was, because we drove down there, I think, in your Rover at the time, and very much pulled rank on me, and he drove the Mercedes back from London, and I got to drive your Rover back.
Yeah, and that was the same car that Ian Dowie had, which we had to go and pick up off Ian when Ian left. And gave it to Brian, but thanks for helping us out then, Brod. It was great.
You know what, Alan? Before we go, there are a number of fairly ridiculous things that you've made me do over the course of the years at the club. I might as well throw a couple at you, see if you remember. Before a home game, Jermaine Johnson, his car basically exploded on the M602. And you sent me down to pick him up from the hard shoulder. Well, essentially, his car was on fire, so he wouldn't miss the game.
Well, it was important. He was an integral part of the team, wasn't he? And we had to have him there.
You also got me the closest that I've ever been to getting killed at a football game was directly because of you. Now, I don't know if you remember this. It was a Friday night, and we were away at Cardiff, live on Sky. And it was Ninian Park, and there were only 3 people there from Oldham. It was you, me, and Nick. And David Ayres equalised in the 92nd, 93rd minute to make it 1-1. And all through the game, we'd been sat in the director's box when Sam Haman had been jumping up and down celebrating. So at that point, whenever I was fortunate enough to go with you to a game, I always took my lead as to whether you should celebrate in a director's box from what you did. And at 93 minutes in, you jumped up in the air. Now,
as you would.
The PA announcer at Cardiff before the game, it wasn't long after they'd beaten us by 7 at Boundary Park, and they were playing the Magnificent 7 before the game, and you were pretty riled up. Cardiff had been celebrating going in front. So, of course, me and Nick also jump up because you've jumped up, and it took 4 stewards to keep Cardiff fans out of the director's box and trying to get at us.
Yeah, they were like that, Cardiff. But it was worse than that, though. If you went in the director's box at Millwall, it was worse than that. You didn't have to do anything at Millwall before you got spat on or whatever. Even in the director's box, trying to get at you before the game started down there. But there've been some rare occasions. Yeah, I mean, I remember that one. Yeah, there was just the 3 of us there, wasn't there? Yeah.
And the other daft we did, again, myself and your son Nick, we had a Brentford away game on a Saturday lunchtime, and it coincided with England playing a rugby union game at home to Twickenham. And you were on the team coach, and it got stuck on the M4 flyover. And Nick got a call about 1:45. We were sat in one of the pubs in the corner. At the time, Brentford had 4 pubs on each corner of the ground.
One on each corner, yeah.
Yep. We were sat in there when Nick's phone rang, and it was you from the team coach. Me and Nick ended up having to run to the ground to go and find Brentford's club secretary and then present ourselves to the dressing room as manager and captain to give the team sheet in because the club didn't make it there in time to do it.
It was important because at 2:00, an hour before kick-off, you had to go into the referee's dressing room along with the opposition captain and what have you, manager, and present your team sheet, exchange team sheets with Brentford and the referee and what have you. And if you didn't do that, you get a fine. So at least we could get the team sheet there, you see, so we won't break any rules in that respect. So it was important. And I think Nick had to go up to the Brentford's secretary's office to get the team sheet. They arranged that they'd let us have one of their team sheets to fill in. I have to tell you the team over the phone.
Yep.
Yeah. Write it down and get it submitted for us. And it saves us a club of fine, that one. So another well done.
I remember coach getting there. Ronnie Moore was manager at the time. And Ronnie got off the coach and said, "Thanks, lads." And we looked at Ronnie and said, "Don't worry, we've only made 2 changes," and wandered off. And we drew 3-3 there that day. Chris Porter scored a hat-trick.
Yeah, I can't understand why we would have been stuck, to be honest, because unless we stayed out at Slough, and that's why we're coming in, and that's why normally, I think later on, we started staying in Chiswick, which is just around the corner from Brentford. But we would in plenty of time to get to the ground for around about 1:30. But obviously, with the crowds going there, it was impossible. We all factored that into the calculations. Thanks for saving us.
One of the other daft stories is, unfortunately, it comes under Chris Moore. We had a pre-season game under Ian Dowie at Middlesbrough. And we flew there on Chris Moore's helicopter.
Helicopter, wonderful, isn't it?
And I always remember...
There was good things came out of Chris Moore, but not many.
That's my only ever helicopter ride to this date. And I remember landing at Middlesbrough's training ground, and Middlesbrough at the time were in talks to re-sign Juninho. And as this helicopter landed on a Saturday morning, there were loads of press and photographers in the bushes taking pictures. And I remember me and you standing on either side of Nick and covering him up. So people thought that Nick was Juninho landing at Middlesbrough's training ground. It was ridiculous.
Well, there's some good times, actually. There's some good fun. I also remember when we had pre-season trialists playing, we had to keep it secret, so to speak, so other clubs didn't know who we were having on trial and they couldn't come in and meet them. We used to make names up for them. And I think the best one was, I think we had Philip Morris when he was at Chelsea. You know what I'm talking about.
I do.
I can't remember the names. We made up names, and we'd always get the fans trying to work out who they were. And of course, Phil Morris was Philippe Murray, who we brought up from Chelsea to have a look at before we signed him and what have you. And there was other names. Now I can't just think what the others were, but we used to make up names for players and play them in pre-season friendlies. And the fans would always, more often than not, the fans would always get the real name. They were really good.
So, a couple of things that happened while you were chief exec that I want to bring up. So, one of the more controversial things at the time was that we took Lee Hughes from obviously from prison. That can't have been an easy thing to do. How did that come about?
Again, it was in a board meeting, and there was the three amigos, myself, and Barry Owen was on the board. And Simon Blitz brought it up. He says, I've been reading that Lee Hughes is going to be coming out on not probation, what do they call it? Parole. How about us approaching him, see if he wants to play? Barry says, leave that to me. I'll make inquiries. And it was left to Barry Owen to sort out, and he ended up having one or two meetings with I think he met Lee down at the Winston Green, and Lee agreed to come on. I mean, it was a difficult one because of the sentence he was serving and what have you, but he's a good footballer. And he did all right for us while he was with us. I know a lot of the fans didn't really appreciate the fact that we were signing somebody who was just coming out of prison for killing people in a dangerous driving situation. But I think he perhaps convinced most of them with his performances that it perhaps the right thing to do. Well, I'm glad I wasn't involved. I'm glad I wasn't involved in the other decision or the other to try and sign the other player. That was after my time. That one.
We spoke to Neil Joy on the podcast a few weeks ago, and Neil talks at length about that week and how that was. But with signing Lee Hughes, was there like moral dilemmas? Was the board split on it as to whether to do it? And did you get much of a backlash nationally for doing it?
I think there was a bit of negative publicity regarding it, but the two Simons and Danny were all up for it. So basically, they'd be paying the wages, and they wanted to do it. And I can't say, it had my full support. And he was a good player, but we did cross swords once or twice.
See, I know this. I was stood in the tunnel during one of these, and it's how much?
Oh, that was after he'd left. But I mean, in my position as chief executive, I was there, and if any of the players breached club rules, then they were fined. And it was me who had to write the letters and sign the letters that you were fined 1 week's wage, 2 weeks' wages, or whatever. But yeah, Lee was fined, and then when he came back playing for it, was it not? Who did he sign for?
We sent him to Blackpool.
Blackpool. Right. It must have been. He came back with another club anyway, and I was in the tunnel. I think it might have been half time, end of the game, whatever it was anyway. And he sees me there, and he comes. He never forgot the fact that I'd written a letter to him, fining him 2 weeks' wages, and he had me in a headlock. And thankfully, some of our players pulled him off me.
Yes, I was.
If you were there, were you? I didn't know. Were you there?
Yep. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So that's Lee Hughes covered. One of the other things that happened that was quite infamous at the club during your time there, Bellevue Dogs. The
Well,
night out.
apparently it was a good night. But I don't know. I mean, we had an investigation afterwards. Something went on, obviously, and it wasn't too pleasant what we heard. So just let's leave it at that.
Right, I think probably for the best. One of the things that you'd have been involved in after John Sheridan was, I think it was the final 9 games of the season, Joe Royal's homecoming. How did that come about?
Well, it was a case of we wanted somebody just to the end of the season. Looked around who was available. Not many decent managers available. The suggestion was, should we ask Joe to come back and fill in for the last, was it 9 games, something like that? Approached Joe, and Joe was happy to come in. Didn't work out as well as we would have liked. He'd been coming back because I think, did he only win 1 game in that 9-game spell? But in hindsight, you might say Joe might have now think it was the wrong thing for him to have done, and it might have been the wrong thing for the club to have asked him that in hindsight. Just like it was wrong to bring Andy Gorham in for a game.
Yeah, that wasn't the most glorious of homecomings either, was it? You've worked with quite a few managers in your spell as chief executive.
You know, I thought you might ask me this, because in my time, I did do some calculation. And in my time at the club, from 81, the first 13 years, I had 2 managers, Jimmy Frizzle and Joe Royal. And then from 81 in total, from 81 to 2012, when I retired, there'd been 18 managers. 18 managers in then 31 years. And now, from 81 to currently, there's been 35 managers. That's far too many, isn't it?
I think that's for any football club. One of the things we spoke about last week about Joe was that he got time and that he got the chance to do it. But I think football now is more of a immediate results business. I think it's become more of a business, and managers don't tend to get as much. No. I mean, look at, like, it took Jurgen Klopp a few years at Liverpool to start winning Champions League and league titles. And he got the time to do it. Are there any managers from your spell as chief exec? I mean, I can think of one that I think should have been given more time. And I think Ronnie Moore deserved a bit more time.
Yeah, I thought Ronnie Moore did a good job, actually. In a particular brand of football that he wants to play, it didn't suit all the fans. But I thought he did a decent job, certainly, yeah. Yeah, should have given him a bit more time.
Of all the managers, who did you have the best working relationship with? Not Joe, obviously. I mean, in your kind of CEO years, who did you have the best working relationship with?
Well, let's look back through. Paul was good. Paul Dickoff. Yeah, got on all right with Paul. We had Tony Phillips in a couple of times as caretaker. Yep. Oh, and always got on well with Tony. Shez had his own particular way of doing things. He just got on with things, like, didn't really want to know about anything else. But I expect, looking back through everybody who we had there, I got on well with Mick Wadsworth when he was there. I'd known Mick from him playing non-league football, because he played for Mosley when I was there.
Right. Okay.
So I'd known him from those days, and I'd known him from his work in with the FA, and of course when Mosley took on Howard Wilkinson as manager, we took him from Boston United, and then he was not with us, only with us for a short time, and he left to go as assistant to Jimmy Cyril in Notts County, and then obviously became England manager. And that was the second person that had at Mosley as manager who went on to manage England. Did you know that?
I didn't even know he had one.
Winterbottom, Harold Winterbottom was the first one who played at Mosley, and then Howard Wilkinson.
There you go. No, I definitely didn't know that. So let's have a look. What when it came to sort of 2012, and obviously it was kind of health reasons that led to a retirement rather than age, wasn't it? Really,
it was. I think a lot of people will already know that I was, and I think it's important this because there's a message I need to get over to people that I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. And Viv, my wife, kept saying, you should go to the doctors because you keep getting up during the night to go for a pee. I said, I don't think it's nothing unusual. Yeah, you need to go and just get yourself checked out. So eventually I went to the doctors and took a blood test, and it showed that the PSA readings were pretty high. So I was referred to an oncologist, had some biopsies done, and I was told in November 2009 that I got prostate cancer. And there was various things I could do. I could have surgery to have it out. I could have radiotherapy. I could have brachytherapy. There's various things. I did a lot of research into, what's the best treatment. And I looked, if you had radiotherapy and it didn't work, you couldn't have surgery afterward because of the scar tissue. If you had surgery and there was still something there, you could have radiotherapy afterwards. So I opted for surgery, and I had the prostate out in December 2009. And for the next 18 months, I was having 3 monthly checkups, and the PSA was starting to go up again. So it gave the indication that there was something still there. So through Christie's, I opted for radiotherapy. And I went to the Christie Centre at Royal Oldham, which is a fabulous facility there, to be honest. They were only doing breast cancer radiotherapy and prostate cancer radiotherapy at the time. But I had a month, 4 weeks of radiotherapy. I would be the first appointment in the morning. So get me in early. First appointment you do, 8:30. So I would go in, have my session of radiotherapy, go into the club, do a full day, following morning, back to Christie's there, another session. And I did that for a month. And later, I was feeling really rough. I went to, but this was like 18 months after the surgery. Anyway, I went to the doctors eventually, and I said, I'm feeling really, really run down, no energy and whatnot. He said, well, it's your body. It's telling you you're doing too much. You can't continue working after the radiotherapy you've had done. So this was in November of 2011. He says, I'm going to give you a month off to see how you go on. So I said, okay. So I went back after a month. He says, how do you feel? I said, I feel a lot better. He says, I think you need to give it some thought about retiring. You've done long enough. I know you're not retirement age, but you've got to think the rest of your life now. I'm going to give you 6 months off, and after 6 months, decide what you're going to do. And to be honest, to be fair to the club, to be off for 6 months not knowing what was going to happen wasn't fair. So I thought, well, I need to make a decision earlier than that. So I had a chat with my wife, and it was decided that I would take early retirement. I had to give 3 months' notice, so my notice period was finished in the March of 2012, and that was my official retirement date at the end of March. But the message you want to get over to people is do not put off getting your PSA checked out, because I didn't think there was anything wrong with it, and I'm one of the lucky survivors. I mean, people ignore it and don't get over it, and prostate cancer is one of the biggest killers for men, as we all know that. Jeff Stelling has done a great job prostate cancer off Sky Sports there. So I mean, I was only 59 when I was diagnosed with it. But if people, perhaps once they get into the 50s, should get a regular PSA check done, so they know how it's going. And that's my shout for prostate cancer, because I'm thankful that they sorted it out for me, and here I am, 12 years later, still going, thankfully. But if I had to sort it out, done what my wife told me to do, I might not have been.
Well, one of the things we did the season after, so I always joke with you about that. My time at the club full time, obviously I've been knocking around for years, but my time at the club full time started pretty much about a week after you retired. So I think you'd put a block on it for years. But one of the things that we did the season after was Prostate Cancer UK was on the back of the shirts.
Right. Yeah.
Sort of raising awareness on the back of that. So
yeah, and they were doing. Did the Football League do bike rides for it or something? Was
that started the season after? Yeah.
Yeah. Which is great. I mean, more support we can give to Prostate Cancer UK, the better.
So I've got a few, like last time, just a few quick fire questions at you about your time as CEO. So, best player?
I've got to go for David Ayres in that. He had a fabulous left foot, true professional. He didn't come into the professional game till late in his career, but he really looked after himself. Was a gentleman around the club, very, very easy to deal with. Had a good relationship with all the people in the office as well. He was a wonderful player, but he also did it on the pitch. So I'd have to go for David Ayres in that.
Okay. Right. What we have? Right. Which player would you dread knocking on your door because you knew it was going to be a problem?
Lee Hughes.
Fair enough. You mentioned earlier a couple of players that we nearly signed. Any big names, players or managers that we nearly got?
Well, there was always that one. I don't know if it was first time or second time round. Clyde Wynard. I mean, I saw him at the club a couple of seasons back. He pops to the games now and again, but we've not been anywhere near the place for 12 months, have we? But I remember being in our office, and I don't know whether I said it was the first time, but we got the forms all signed up. He said, "Yeah," he said, "it's no problem. I'll just pop out and make a phone call." I never saw him again. Just disappeared. I'm sure that was a Clyde Wynard first time, but then when he did play for us, he was decent. He scored some goals. Yeah,
that's good, mate. Okay, one, but we'll go with it anyway.
You should have warned me about these beforehand, Brody. Had I given it some thought?
Well, that's why I wanted on the spot answers, just to get your true quick feelings on it. This one might be a difficult one, but we'll go with it anyway. During your time as CEO of the club, biggest regret?
Personal one or club one?
Both or either.
Well, I've already gone over the fact that the biggest regret was that we didn't get that planning permission in the June of 2007, which would have made the future of the club a lot more secure than it is currently. And I think we'd have gone on to prosper. It was very, very messy trying to sort out the Failsworth situation. A lot of fans were against that. Some could see the benefits of moving down there. It didn't come off, as we all know, at the end of the day. The one that I wish would have come off would have been Sports Park 2000, which would have given us a new stadium on Clayton playing fields, and the playing fields moved to where the ground is now. But that was John Batty's plans at Oldham Council in the late 90s. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. And that's probably, it could have been like a Bolton Wanderers stadium there. That's what, was envisaged and the plans were drawn up for, but unfortunately never happened.
Okay. Do you have, from your later spell at the club, a favourite game from your time as CEO?
Right, my best game's got to be the Everton FA Cup game, the Gary McDonald spectacular goal. And, nobody expected us to win at Everton on that day. I don't think we had a particularly strong team out, but the lads grafted hard. And thanks to Gary, a spectacular goal.
Excellent. Well, that was the final question. So thank you very, very much for taking the time to join us and to look back over in two parts at your 31 years at the club.
It's nice to have done it, Roddy, but let's hope we can start seeing fans back in grounds pretty soon.
A huge thank you to Alan for taking the time to join us over the course of the last 2 weeks. A 2-part interview with Alan, looking back over 31 years at the club. Some really interesting stuff in there. Thank you very much to you guys for tuning in. Once again, a big thank you to our sponsors, to Eden Creative, to AC Tyres, and to NFL Weekend. Check them out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Big thank you to you guys for listening, as always. Please do get in touch with us at the Chaddy Enders. Any feedback, any questions you want to put to future guests, please do let us know. Have a fantastic week. And once again, thank you very much for tuning into the Chaddy Enders.